Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Someday I hope you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine there's no country. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Someday I hope you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Those are the lyrics of Imagine, written by John Lennon, born October 9th in 1940. And this is Atheist History Week, and I'm John Rafferty, president of the Secular Humanist Society of New York, and a proud and active member of New York City Atheists, which produces this show. Each week at this time, we look at the week's anniversaries in the history of free thought, of atheism, agnosticism, secularism, humanism, skepticism, rationalism, what have youism. We discuss notable people, the famous and the not so and the infamous, who were born or died or achieved something significant in regards free thought during this calendar week. And we look at significant events that took place this week in history: court cases, publishing events, religious riots, burnings at the stake, and other faith-based fun and games. It's the second week in October, and we have quite a few people to talk about this week. John Lennon, not least of all, born, as I said, in 1940, who caused one hell of a stink in 1966 at the height of the Beatles' fame, when he was interviewed and by a British newspaper, and he claimed that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus. Christianity will go, he said. It will vanish and shrink. I needn't argue about that. I'm right, and I will be proved right. We are more popular than Jesus now. I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity. Jesus was all right, but his disciples were thick and ordinary. It's them twisting it that ruins it for me. Well, his records and his pictures were burned in America when that story came over, and he subsequently apologized for talking the truth. He, of course, as we all know, was murdered by a certifiable lunatic who, in this gun-crazed country, was able to buy a pistol and ammunition in spite of a history of mental illness. And sad loss. But from our perspective, think of what he said in an interview with Playboy that was published in the 1981 issue, which came out just days after he was shot dead on December 8th in 1980. He said, "This whole religion business suffers from the onward Christian soldiers bit. There's too much talk about soldiers and marching and converting. I'm not pushing Buddhism because I'm no more a Buddhist than I am a Christian. But there's one thing I admire about Buddhism: there's no proselytizing." John Lennon, born October 9th, 1940. Born October 10th in 1961 is Julius Sweeney. The comedian and author who has made a career of discussing her giving up of religion, her conversion to free thought, with her shows like in God Said Ha, In the Family Way, and Letting Go of God. An actress and a comedian, she played that androgynous character, Pat, on Saturday Night Live from in the early 90s, 1990 to 1994. It was a character that you almost couldn't tell whether it was a male or female, and the jokes revolved around that. But in 1994, she and her brother Michael were both diagnosed with cancer, which prompted her to write the play, in which she also starred, God Said Ha, and which won a Grammy. And then she wrote a monologue about adopting her daughter from China called In the Family Way. And in October of 2004, her latest monologue, Letting Go of God, came out, or she started doing her latest monologue, which also came out on DVD, which I recommend to you very highly, and also it's in print, about her journey from Roman Catholic schoolgirl to atheist. And she said her goal for the book was to get in the inspirational sections of bookstores, especially those airport bookstores, which are filled with the crap that people put out about how, finding God made better, certified public accountants of them, and all that kind of stuff. She said, why isn't there a book about someone losing their faith and it being this beautiful experience? So that's what Letting Go of God was all about. It took me years, she wrote, but letting go of religion has been the most profound wake-up of my life. I feel I now look at the world not as a child, but as an adult. I see what's bad and really bad, but I also see what is beautiful, what is wonderful, and I feel so deeply appreciative that I'm alive. How dare the religious use the term born again? That truly describes free thinkers who've thrown off the shackles of religion so much better. Throwing off the shackles also, Harold Pinter. The playwright, who's British, who was born October 10th in 1930 to a Jewish family, and has become one of the major playwrights of the 20th and into the 21st century, who wrote, he's written 29 plays, 21 screenplays, and has been a director of 27 theater productions. His plays include The Birthday Party, The Caretaker, The Homecoming, and The Betrayal. The screenplays include The Servant, The Go-Between, The French Lieutenant's Woman, and The Handmaid's Tale. 4 of the best movies I've ever seen. And any of them that you haven't seen, make sure you do. He's won every prize there is, and he's fighting cancer today, and he is politically active, as you could well imagine, on the left. And about his religious attitudes, he's written, I had my bar mitzvah when I was 13, and I never entered a synagogue again. I've been to 1 or 2 marriages, I think, but I've never had anything to do with it. Harold Pinter, born October 10th in 1930. Okay, let's go back from contemporary freethinkers all the way back into the 17th century. And on October 9th in 1635, one of the true heroes of free thought in America, Roger Williams, was banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. His crime was that he promulgated the notion that the government, the state, should not interfere with people's religion. They should not tell people how or when or why or in what order they should worship God. And Williams was a Baptist, and in Massachusetts, Baptists and Quakers they were there. They were basically persecuted by those same pilgrims who had come over here to escape persecution. Williams, of course, was not the only one. A few weeks ago, we spoke on this same program about Anne Hutchinson, who was banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony about the same time as Roger Williams. When I was a kid growing up, the American history books talked about Roger Williams, but not about Anne Hutchinson, and they were just equally important. We don't talk about Roger Williams so much anymore because Anne Hutchinson got a river and a parkway named after her, so we all know who Hutchinson was. Okay. Roger Williams really had a little bit more trouble than Anne Hutchinson in getting out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He had to literally flee in the dead of winter to escape prison or hanging, and with 4 others, and they established a colony in what is now Rhode Island called Providence, which it was carried over and became the name of the state, state capital of Rhode Island. Baptists like Williams and Quakers and other nonconformists were welcomed, and the settlement was chartered in 1663 by the British Crown, and was right up at the time of the Revolution, a century and a half later, one of those 4 of the original 13 colonies that did not have an established religion, because as the charter that Williams wrote promised, and it's very much like the one that Anne Hutchinson's family set up. I mean, the wording, no person within said colony shall be in any wise molested, punished, disquieted, or called in question for any differences in opinion in matters of religion, and do not actually disturb the civil peace of our said colony. God, Roger Williams said, requireth not an uniformity of religion to be enacted and enforced in any civil state, quote unquote. Roger Williams anticipating the First Amendment of the Constitution by 150 years. Back to today, and to Katha Pollitt, who was born October 14th in 1949. Katha Pollitt, one of the most prolific writers in America on the left, and definitely an atheist and a freethinker. She's been named the Free Thought Heroine of the Year by the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and she volunteers her atheism and defends rationalism in her many books and magazine articles in such publications as the New Yorker, the Atlantic, the New Republic, Grand Street, the Yale Review, lots of others. A collection of her writings, Reasonable Creatures, essays on women and feminism, which was published by Knopf. Is that the title is a play on the something Mary Wollstonecraft wrote back in the early 19th century, who said, "I wish to see women neither heroines nor brutes, but reasonable creatures." Katha Pollitt, who writes, as I say, from the left on politics, she wrote about those right-wing family values guys that we are constantly catching in bed with their interns and secretaries, and or in airport men's rooms. She said, "You'd think by now politicians would realize that promoting family values is like wearing a kick me sign on your back." she also wrote, the question is, will the rest of America get fed up with the fundamentalists before the fundamentalists and the Republican Party get fed up with each other? And how much damage will they do before that happy day arrives? Also, in the 20th century, but somewhat earlier, was E. Cummings, the poet, the famous lowercase poet who did everything without capital letters. His father was a Unitarian minister, and he led a very interesting life. And maybe that's where all that great poetry came from. He was a magna cum laude graduate in both Greek and English from Harvard, and got a master's, and he volunteered in France in the First World War before America got involved. And he was part of an ambulance group, and he and a pacifist friend were falsely imprisoned for treason and damn near shot, but not. And they spent 4 months in a detention camp, which inspired his first anti-authoritarian novel, The Enormous Room. His first book of poetry, Tulips and Chimneys, came out in 1923, and he continued writing and publishing the rest of his life, until he died in 1962. He was definitely a free thinker. Can we label him an atheist? I don't suppose so, and probably Cummings wouldn't have cared at all. One of his poems includes the lines, "The Cambridge ladies who live in furnished souls and unbeautiful and have comfortable minds, also with the church's Protestant blessings, daughters, unscented, shapeless, spirited. They believe in Christ and Longfellow, both dead." E. Cummings, born October 14th in 1894. Eleanor Roosevelt was certainly no atheist, but one of the better minds of the 20th century. Born October 11th in 1884, and to make her own place in history while being married to one of the most famous men in history was pretty good. She was certainly one of the not at all, the most influential First Lady in the history of the United States of America, with the possible exception of Dolly Madison, who saved most of our heritage from the burning by the Brits in the War of 1812. But okay. As First Lady from 1933 to 1945, she was a champion of reform and civil rights. She's a champion of reform in terms of the conditions of workers, especially in the mines of America and the factories, and of the cause of civil rights for the African Americans in America, who were then called the Negroes. She sat in the black section at an auditorium in Birmingham, Alabama in 1938. The First Lady went to a theater in Alabama in 1938 and sat in the colored-only section. She resigned from the Daughters of the American Revolution the next year after it infamously barred Marian Anderson, the singer from. She personally insisted that her husband ensure that African Americans were not shut out of New Deal projects, which would have happened just automatically in those days. As the First Lady, she was hated by the right wing and the religious nuts in the country. You think Hillary Clinton had it tough? No, 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 no. Eleanor Roosevelt was hanged in effigy all over the South. She broke tradition by holding her own press conferences, traveling and lecturing and giving radio broadcasts, and wrote a 6-day-a-week newspaper column called My Day that was syndicated in 500 words a day, that was syndicated all over America in newspapers, except for the Hearst newspapers, that ran, and they ran until 1962. She was a champion of liberty and of free thought. The only thing we have about her own personal opinion of religion was that she wrote, well, she wrote what, most importantly, she wrote, "Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief." And that declaration was adopted by the United Nations in 1948. Of course, it's under serious challenge right now by the Muslim fundamentalists who want to make blasphemy an international crime, and that's another, we'll take that up another night. "The Bible illustrated by Doré," she wrote, "occupied many of my hours in my childhood, and I think probably gave me many nightmares." Eleanor Roosevelt, born October 11th in 1884. Here's a name that I was not familiar with, and I should have been, and I hope that you'll agree with me. And this is going to be a beaut. Fridtjof Nansen. F-R-I-D-T-J-O-F. Fridtjof Nansen. Born October 10th in 1861. A Norwegian explorer who explored on skis. He crossed Greenland on skis, the first one. He went to the Arctic on skis. He was an explorer, and a very famous one. And because he was an explorer and brought back to Norway many samples of different kinds of flora and fauna, he was appointed curator of the Bergen Natural History Museum, where he met leading scientists of the day and became a Darwinist. He helped negotiate. Oh yeah. Until the early 20th century, Norway and Sweden were one country. Sweden, really. But they negotiated very peacefully and split the country. Nansen was the chief negotiator for one of the most interesting political dissolutions in history. No one was killed. Not a bad idea. Anybody ever thought of dividing this country? Oh, yeah, that happened once. Well, we won't get into it. He, in the early 20s, when famine struck the Soviet Union, he engineered a successful prisoner swap between Russia and Germany, Austria-Hungary, and involving more than 400,000 prisoners. And for that, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1922. He worked not only with the League of Nations, but with the International Red Cross, which used his name, which was a very famous name at the time, on a special passport for refugees who had been deprived by Soviet dictator Lenin of their nationality during the Russian Civil War. And thousands of people came to the West from this new Soviet Union, which very quickly became a dictatorship even worse than the Tsarist dictatorship, bearing a Nansen passport, not a Russian or a Soviet or a Swedish or a Norwegian or any other passport, a Nansen passport. And who came? Well, a few people like Stravinsky, Rachmaninoff, Chagall. We owe their continued existence to Fridtjof Nansen. He was an outspoken agnostic who made his views very clear. In fact, he had one of the better one-liners. He said, "The religion of one age is, as a rule, the literary entertainment of the next."
Wherever we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation, at least not just. We are also a Jewish nation, a Muslim nation, and a Buddhist nation, and a Hindu nation, and a nation of non-believers.